Which superpower would you never want to have? Welcome back, Nerd Squad. This is Top 10 Nerd and I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Today we'll be counting down the top 10 superheroes with the worst powers. But before we do, have you ever wished we'd focus more on anime and manga? Well, guess what? We have a new channel for you. It's called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. I challenge you to head on over and subscribe. Let's see how quickly we can get this channel to 100,000 subscribers. And now, let's get counting. Number 10, No Girl. No Girl is a creation of Grant Morrison's. Grant Morrison, when they were writing X-Men, decided to create a bunch of new mutants, and all of them were about as weird as you'd imagine someone like Morrison would make them. No Girl, of course, is, well, no exception. Her powers are actually pretty cool, but the fact that she didn't really have a body to speak of for a good amount of the time we've known her in the comics was not really as cool. Of course, this has since been somewhat fixed, as Martha no longer uses the codename No Girl, but instead, after having been given a body by the Five, is known as Cerebella. Cerebella's powers are psionic, but considering that she no longer has her original body as it was taken from her by the U-Men when she was only a teenager, it's often been implied that she actually requires substances to her brain to stay alive. Prior to being given a body again, Cerebella as No Girl was suspended in a liquid-filled sphere or tank and lived her life that way, as a brain. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please go check out our newest channel, Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, and give it a subscribe. Number 9, Angel. Angel might be one of the original X-Men, but that doesn't automatically mean that he is one of the All-Stars or Omega levels when it comes to mutants. Angel's mutant power is that he has wings, which he can use to fly. Angel also possesses hollow bones, which allow him to be light enough to soar using said wings, but also maybe make him a little bit hollow and weak in other ways. He is an extremely gifted and skilled flyer, having trained for years with how to use his wings, and he's also an adept businessman, being Warren Worthington III in civilian life and hailing from a wealthy and respected family. However, it's still pretty easy to defeat Angel when you need to. Even recently in the comics, in X-Force issue number 30, we've seen him kidnapped and literally had one of his wings cut off as a result of people being angry and frustrated with the revelation that mutants have recently unlocked their own secret to immortality. Just goes to show you how easy it is to mess with Angel. It's kind of sadly too easy. Number 8, Broo. I honestly love Broo, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there, he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Broo may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the other more well-known mutants out there. Broo's mutant power and mutation actually make him compassionate, which for a member of the Brood is a super power, really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy at all like humans do. But for an X-Men, well, it's kinda less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive, for a Brood, compassion is pretty amazing to have as an ability. And currently, Broo is also king of the Brood, so there's also that, which makes him pretty cool now, but wasn't always. Number 7, Starfox. Starfox's powers aren't bad in the way of them being, I would say, non-useful. They're more bad in the sense that they're considered to be, kinda shady. Starfox is also known as Eros, originally named Aaron at birth by his parents. He had his name changed to Eros when he was still young due to his love of the ladies and his reputation for being a ladies' man. Eros in Greek mythology on Earth is known for being the god of passion and fertility, so this is pretty fitting. Starfox is Thanos' brother, but instead of being a notorious villain like him, he would become a hero and even an Avenger. He has a lot of powers, but the one people tend to focus on when it comes to his more problematic powers is his ability to create emotional bridges and connections between people and affect one's feeling of pleasure, which has caused many to feel that Starfox has manipulated others not just for altruistic purposes, but also for his own benefits as well. And also, you know, there's the question of consent. Pretty big question. Number 6, Red Bee. I know a lot of people love Red Bee, so I feel like this is a bit of a sad one to have on this list, but unfortunately, hey, I gotta pick some folks. Even if I myself love them as characters, you know, we gotta say some people got some bad powers. Red Bee is Richard Rayleigh, who is a hero from the World War II era in the New Earth continuity, who mainly fought his enemies with his amazing animal training skills and his bee sidekick, initially known back in his Quality Comics days as Michael. Michael called the Bee, who was extremely intelligent and could also sting multiple times without perishing. No, I'm not kidding, it was a real thing. Tragically, Red Bee was of course killed off pretty early in the New Earth continuity. However, the brilliant part of this seemingly more lame character is that Red Bee is also a fan favorite and has actually been brought back a few different times in different iterations due to him having a small but pretty passionate fan base, I'd say. If you like Red Bee, let me know in the comments. I know you're out there, the Red Bee fans. Number 5. Peacemaker. Peacemaker is one of my favorite characters lately from DC, thanks to John Cena's portrayal of the character in his own self-titled miniseries, but I still acknowledge that this is one of the worst characters out there when it comes to his powers and his capabilities and just kind of a lot of stuff about him. In the comics, you might argue that Peacemaker's power actually stems from kind of his mental illness. The fact that he is extremely well trained. Before the DCEU, Gunn, and Cena made him cool, Peacemaker was Christopher Smith, a man haunted by his father's untimely end and past, who was trained to be basically a killer, believing that any force was necessary if it meant attaining some level of peace. If I had to sum up his depiction in the comics previously in one word, I would have said unhinged. I still think we'll get some of that explored more as the show progresses. We already kind of got some of it in season 1, but I do think it'll be approached from a more real and grounded place as opposed to just making Chris feel like the violent and often misguided lunatic that he seemed to be back in the New Earth continuity. Number 4. Doorman. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, and I don't even think they're technically affiliated with the Avengers, like I don't think the Avengers want to be affiliated with the Great Lakes Avengers. They are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you could possibly expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's quite specific, so finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman actually does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers to make himself seem pretty useful. Doorman's power allows him to create in essence a doorway or a door between adjacent areas that are separated, you know, like by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and, you know, much less useful in other cases, depending on the scenario. Number 3, Big Bertha. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of this is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a tall, thin, runway supermodel. Ashley of course can transform from bigger to smaller, but to do so, she has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic and why this made the list. More recently in the comics, Marvel has kind of tried to redeem this character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Big Bertha around in the comics for some time. They're trying though. Number 2, Beak. Not all mutants get to be as badass as Iceman or Cable. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Like Skin, who was on part 1 of this list, Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird, and he's basically built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even really fly. Struggled a lot with that. Beak has since figured out kinda how to fly, or rather like glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go short distances and it takes a lot of work. And even going short distances, he doesn't really have a ton of like tactical flying skills to speak of either. Fortunately, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Number 1, the Detachable Kid, or TDK. The Detachable Kid sounds like a pretty lame hero, and well, he is. He also isn't exactly a bona fide hero as he's a member of the Suicide Squad, but seeing as how this is a team primarily made up of, you know, reformed criminals and villains, well I mean villains at least who are forced into being good to get time lifted off their sentence, I think we can still count him. I think I'm gonna count him, so if you have a problem with it, we'll talk in the comments. TDK is played by Nathan Fillion in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and was created just for the movie and the DCEU, but the character does take inspiration from someone else on part 1 of this list, Arm Fall Off Boy, and his other post-Zero Hour comic book alternate, Splitter, who's also another version of that character. At least TDK has a somewhat cooler name, but unlike Arm Fall Off Boy, his prowess is a little less admirable. When it's time for him to fight, he detaches his arms and uses them to attack. Now the other cool thing I gotta say say is TDK can actually control his arms like using his mind, which is kinda cool, but that plan is still pretty terrible and he's pretty quickly defeated by being shot a whole bunch, both in his detached arms, which he seems to, you know, still be able to feel, and directly in his body where he gets shot up a bunch, so he's instantly gone. Also, sorry, that's a spoiler, but also that movie's old now, so should have watched it. Thank you so much for watching. I am your host, Amanda McKnight. I appreciate you joining us, and until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.